Coming up in our newscast tonight. June 6th is when Koreans commemorate those who gave their lives to ensure democracy and peace of the nation. And on the eve of such meaningful day, President Moon Jae-in invites relatives of war vets, pro-democracy protesters, firefighters, and others from all walks of life to honor the fallen heroes. At 9 a.m. in Singapore, local time next Tuesday, the much-anticipated North Korea-U.S. summit will take place. But it seems like this meeting could be just the first of many more meetings to come. That's according to the White House. It's World Environment Day. President Moon Jae-in urges the public to celebrate the occasion by spending a plastic-free day, highlighting the importance of taking such small steps to make major green changes. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. Koreans celebrate Memorial Day tomorrow. It's when the people honor those who died defending the country, as well as active military personnel. On the eve of that special day, President Moon Jae-in invited hundreds of guests, including relatives of the fallen heroes and those who are serving the nation, to Cheongwadae. Hwang Ho-jun starts us off with the highlights from that luncheon.
229 guests with 229 different stories. These officially recognized national heroes and their families were invited to the nation's top office for a luncheon hosted by the South Korean president himself. Tuesday's event was held under the slogan, "We remember you in the name of the Republic of Korea."
보훈은 국민의 마음을 하나로 모으고 강한 국가를 만드는 주춧돌입니다. 나라다운 나라는 국가 유공자와 모든 가족들이 자부심을 가질 수 있을 때 완성된다는 것이 대통령으로서 저의 확고한 소신입니다.
This was the second meeting of its kind since President Moon took office over a year ago. The guests included the relatives of veterans of the 1950-53 Korean War, heroes of the pro-democracy movement, soldiers who died while defending the nation, and fallen firefighters. But of course, it wasn't just military personnel who were honored. The two teachers who died while rescuing the high school students on board the Sewol-ho ferry in 2014, which, according to the president, was a task originally entrusted to the Coast Guard, were honored posthumously and are now officially recognized as military heroes killed in the line of duty. President Moon stressed that it is the duty of the state to uphold and honor what it means to be a true educator. During the event, the Liberal leader first noted the changes he has tried to bring about regarding the way Korea's national heroes and their families are recognized. Such efforts include upgrading the former Agency for Patriots and Veterans Affairs to a government ministry in its own right, allocating nearly $1.9 billion to compensate the veterans, increasing their war pensions to an all-time high, and boosting their medical care deduction rate from 60% to 90%. President Moon said his administration will continue to ensure that patriotism is a core national value and that veterans are honored. He insisted that every last hero needs to be recognized and paid his or her due respect, and that any failure to do so cannot be blamed on a lack of funds or necessary regulations. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
When the South Korean president travels to Moscow for the 2018 World Cup finals later this month, he could sit down for talks with his Russian counterpart. That's according to a report by Interfax news agency citing the Kremlin on Tuesday. Back in February, Vice President of the Russian Olympic Committee Igor Levitin told reporters after meeting with the South Korean president in Seoul that Vladimir Putin invited him to visit Moscow for the finals of the World Cup and that President Moon Jae-in accepted the invitation. The global sporting event kicks off on June 14th and runs through July 15th. Next week, when Koreans head to the polls to pick mayors and governors, by-elections will also be held. With 12 parliamentary seats up for grabs, the results could lead to a change in the balance of power at the National Assembly. Kim Min-ji helped paint a clearer picture of how things could shape up in the domestic political arena.
President Moon Jae-in took office with one eye tied behind his back politically, with his party holding less than a majority of seats in parliament from the get-go. As a result, his policy agendas have been difficult to implement. Both the government's annual budget and supplementary budget were passed only after an arduous process, and plans to amend the constitution also fell through. This is why the ruling Democratic Party of Korea wants to win as many seats as possible during this year's by-elections. 12 seats are up for grabs, and given the number of seats and their distribution across the nation, it's being dubbed a mini general election. 3 of the seats were held by the ruling party, 4 by the main opposition Liberty Korea Party, 3 by the former People's Party, now the centrist Paramita Party, while the remaining were held by other minor parties. Currently, the ruling party has 118 seats in the National Assembly, while the main opposition holds 113. If the ruling party wins the elections by a landslide, it would get a boost when passing bills it supports and will also have a greater say over the shaping of the second half of the 20th National Assembly. This as the biggest party selects a parliamentary speaker and has an upper hand when it comes to choosing the heads of the National Assembly standing committees. Recent polls show candidates from the ruling party in the lead, with the exception of Kimcheon, a traditional conservative district in the south of the country, where the ruling party didn't put forward a candidate. However, the main opposition is hoping that it will be able to hold on to the districts that were initially conservative held, as well as make some gains such as the Songpa district, where there is believed to be quite a number of right-leaning voters. But the general consensus is that the results will favor the ruling party, thanks to the government's role in positive developments regarding North Korea, and because the opposition hasn't been able to bring up any issues of such significance. However, some point out that this could lead to problems in the long run.
Because the Moon administration is dealing with such an important issue for the Korean Peninsula, many voters want to support his peace drive. But if things don't go well, it could mean disaster for the ruling party in 2 years' time when the general elections are held. Also, for a country's political development, there needs to be a balance between progressives and conservatives to keep the ruling party in check, but it appears the parliament will likely sway further to the left-leaning bloc.
Regardless of the outcome, a political reshuffle will likely be in the works. Pundits say that could come in the form of a change in party leadership, the formation of a coalition of some sort, or even defections to other parties. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
We now turn to the latest on the June 12th summit between the leaders of North Korea and the United States. After weeks of will they, won't they, it looks like it's smooth sailing from here on. According to our Park Ki-jun, the White House announced the exact time for that meeting in Singapore.
The White House has confirmed the date and time of the North Korea-U.S. summit. It will be held next Tuesday on June 12th at 9 a.m. Singapore time or 10 a.m. Korea time.
And I can also tell you the schedule for tentatively for that first meeting will be on June 12th at 9 a.m. Singapore time and take place at June 11th, 9 p.m. East Coast time.
The press secretary referred to it as the first meeting. That could be seen as confirmation from Washington that there may be follow-up meetings with North Korea even after the summit in Singapore. It also follows the same line as President Trump's recent remarks, where he hinted at the possibility of multiple talks with Pyongyang.
It'll be a beginning, I don't say, and I've never said it happens in one meeting. You're talking about years of hostility, years of problems, years of really hatred between so many different nations. But I think you're going to have a very positive result in the end, not from one meeting.
The White House has also clarified that the Trump administration's policy of maximum pressure through sanctions remains in place and will stay until the regime has abandoned its nuclear weapons.
Our policy hasn't changed, and as the president stated, we have sanctions on. They're very powerful, and we would not take those sanctions off unless North Korea denuclearized.
The White House was clearing up remarks made last week by President Trump following his meeting with a senior North Korean envoy. Trump said last week he didn't want to use the term maximum pressure anymore to describe U.S. pressure on Pyongyang as they were getting along. He also said he looks forward to the day when he can remove the sanctions from the regime. Park Ki-jun, Arirang News.
Other than the time and date, what about the exact venue for the historic event? There hasn't been any official announcement yet, but as our Park Ji-won reports, one site has recently emerged as the most prominent candidate.
Singapore's Shangri-La Hotel is highly expected to be the venue for next Tuesday's historic North Korea-U.S. summit. Speculation is being driven by the Singaporean government's decision to declare the area around the five-star hotel as a special event area from June 10th to the 14th. With the designation, people and vehicles entering the zone will be subject to strict security checks and police inspections, and certain restricted items will not be allowed into the zone. Since opening its doors in 1971, the Shangri-La Hotel has been the go-to venue in Asia for a series of diverse international events. In 2015, the hotel hosted the landmark summit between China's President Xi Jinping and Taiwan's then-President Ma Ying-jeou, the first ever meeting between the two countries since the 1949 Chinese Communist Revolution. The hotel has also played host to the Shangri-La Dialogue, Asia's biggest meeting of defense ministers, military officials, and security experts every year since 2002. This year's forum ended its three-day run on Sunday with U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis, South Korea's Defense Minister Song Young-moo, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi among those in attendance. Experts in Singapore explain that the five-star hotel's experience of hosting such major events and its location make it a suitable place for the summit talks.
It's actually located off the main commercial belt in Singapore, the Orchard Road belt, in a residential area, but it's not actually very far away. So it's very easy to get to. But when you host major events there, it does not require the authorities to go through a very significant logistical challenge to close off some of the roads or to impose stricter security measures in that area. So it's actually quite convenient in that sense. Another reason is because the hotel actually sits on a higher ground. So it's much easier for any security forces to observe and take note of potential activities which could threaten any major events or even some of the guests there.
Other luxury hotel locations like Capella on Sentosa Island and the Fullerton Hotel in the Marina Bay area are also considered strong candidates for providing rooms for the North Korean and U.S. delegations, but nothing has been confirmed yet. But the venue for the media center has been confirmed. Thousands of journalists will work from the F1 pit building in downtown Singapore to cover the historic summit. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
So unless there aren't any drastic twists and turns last minute, it's looking highly likely next week the two leaders will be locked in talks in Singapore. However, negotiations are still ongoing behind closed doors. For some updates on whether Pyongyang and Washington have found any common ground in exchanging denuclearization for security, let's turn to our Lee Ji-won.
Complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization has been mentioned and explained numerous times by U.S. officials and analysts. But in order to achieve that, is the U.S. ready to give North Korea what it wants, a complete, verifiable, irreversible guarantee of security?
North Korea wants two things from the U.S., eliminating the military threat and guaranteeing its security. And while eliminating the military threat is rather simple, like downsizing or ceasing the joint military drills by South Korea and the U.S., the security guarantee is much more comprehensive.
The North Korean expert says there are 3 points to consider in CVIG. The first is securing North Korea's sovereignty. That would mean ensuring there is no direct military threat against the regime. This could be done through a declaration of the end of the Korean War, which would be followed by a non-aggression pact and then a peace treaty. Second is acknowledging the regime. This means seeing North Korea as a normal nation and establishing diplomatic ties with Pyongyang, maybe first by setting up a liaison office on each other's soil, which could further develop to hosting each other's embassies. Third is giving economic autonomy to the North. The experts said it's not economic support the North seeks from the U.S., but for Washington to simply lift its economic sanctions on Pyongyang and for North Korea to feed itself and join the global economy on its own. U.S. President Donald Trump and his administration seem to be on the right track with their incentives to the North. President Trump mentioned the prospect of ending the decades-long Korean War after his meeting with the vice chairman of North Korea's ruling Workers' Party Central Committee Kim Young-chul last week. But the expert says there still seems to be work left in setting the exact price for North Korea's denuclearization.
A peace treaty, possibly diplomatic ties, the lifting of sanctions, and economic support. These are all things the two sides can exchange, but when and to what extent has yet to be decided. It's a complex matter that requires more negotiations, and I'm thinking that is what the two sides are still discussing.
Though much of the talks are behind closed doors, the world will soon find out how much North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump are each willing to give to the other side. 이지원, Arirang News.
We're sticking with the summit of the century, the first ever encounter of the two very unconventional leaders now. A businessman turned president eager to speak his mind and an enigmatic man in charge of a reclusive state. Meticulous attention is required. Everything has to be prepared beyond usual diplomatic protocol. Our Woo Jung-hee sheds light on what to watch out for when the duo make contact.
U.S. news magazine Politico and the New York Times laid out some of the seemingly trivial but not so trivial details that need settling before the first ever Pyongyang-Washington summit. Those points include how the two leaders will have their first encounter, especially their physical contact. Trump is famous for his aggressive handshake that sometimes pulls his counterpart off balance, while Kim Jong-un has shown some unexpectedly friendly gestures towards South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the past two summits, holding hands and some intense hugging. Another question is, will the flags of both North Korea and the U.S. appear at the photo session? This is also a question of whether Washington considers North Korea as a formal country. Also, given that President Trump is over 20 centimeters taller than North Korea's Kim, there's the question of whether they'll take pictures together standing or only when seated.
A North Korean leader does not want to look weak-kneed in front of his own people. Because in the age of the internet, North Korean leadership cannot really block every bit of information about the summit meeting to infiltrate inside North Korea. So it is very important and essential for Kim Jong-un to pose the right image as the absolute and confident leader of North Korea, shoulder to shoulder to the leader of the most powerful country in the world.
Then there's the menu and what the two leaders will toast with. Kim is known to enjoy wine, but Trump doesn't drink at all. The U.S. must also carefully choose President Trump's gift to Kim Jong-un so that it doesn't violate Washington's own sanctions on North Korea. But the most important point to watch will be, will Kim and Trump issue a joint communique? As the June 12 Singapore summit is expected to be the first of the many, a final and ultimate agreement on denuclearization may not happen this time. Still, what exactly the communique stipulates and whether the two sides will announce that they'll meet again in the future will determine the success of the summit. And there's the question of whether the two leaders will stand before the press together, just like Kim and Moon did at their April inter-Korean summit. Woo Jung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's minimum wage was raised at the start of this year by a record amount, hurting select businesses. Some changes could be implemented to reduce that side effect. It involves calculating some benefits as part of wage payments. Kim Hye-sung explains further.
The cabinet meeting chaired by Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon Tuesday endorsed a revision to the minimum wage law. The amendment, which was passed by the National Assembly last week, includes counting some regular bonuses and welfare benefit allowances when calculating the minimum wage. Korea's business community welcomed the inclusion of the bonuses and welfare allowances in the minimum wage calculation, saying it will help lower the burden of the minimum wage hikes on businesses. This January, Korea raised the hourly minimum wage by over 16% to 7,530 Korean won, or around $7 per hour, the biggest jump in nearly 2 decades. But labor groups have protested against the revision, saying it reduces the effects of a rise in the legal wage threshold by including bonuses and benefits in its calculation, and urging President Moon Jae-in to veto the legislation. The Federation of Korean Trade Unions said Tuesday the passage of the legislation would mean the government has given up on income-led growth. At the cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon said the minimum wage hike and shorter working hours are policies to help improve workers' quality of life, but acknowledged that they are contentious issues and there may be negative side effects in the early stages, and that the government will strive to come up with measures to minimize the negative effects. Now that the revision to the minimum wage law has passed the cabinet meeting, it will be reported in the official gazette once it gets President Moon's approval and will go into effect January 1st next year. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
The nation's steelmakers have been the target of almost 100 import restriction measures since 1991. Amid the current climate of trade protectionism, the local industry has been hit with 6 restrictive measures already just this year. Won Jong-un zooms in on the snowballing challenges.
South Korea's steel industry has long been the target of global trade protectionist measures. Data released by the local steel industry and the Korea International Trade Association shows that since 1991, Korean steel products have been hit with 95 cases of anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, and import safeguards. Restrictions on steel imports accounted for nearly half of the import restrictions for all South Korean exports. Those restrictions have come from 18 countries and from the EU trading bloc. But 28 of those 95 restrictions have come from the United States. And this year alone, the US, Canada, EU, and Turkey have placed 6 new restrictive measures on Korean steel products. According to an expert, trade protectionism in the steel sector is due to the difficulty countries have restructuring the industry.
To restructure the industrial sector, it takes a long time and it also requires huge investment. So one of the easiest way for the government is to take the protectionistic import policy on imported steel products.
He added that the excess supply from newly emerging steel producers like China has also led to protectionist policies.
Some countries like China, they have the competitive advantages in the price, so they may have invested in a huge amount of money in the steel sector, which resulted in the oversupply of the steel products in the global market.
With the revision of the South Korea-U.S. trade deal in March, South Korea's steel exports to the U.S. are restricted to the quota of about 2.68 million tons. And the 6 restrictions placed on Korean steel by other countries this year add to concerns among Korea's steel producers. Won Jong-un, Arirang News.
June 5th is World Environment Day. To mark the occasion, President Moon Jae-in suggested spending a day without using plastic. Highlighting this year's theme of Beat Plastic Pollution, the Liberal leader urged all Koreans to join the nationwide movement. He said protecting the environment and saving the planet could come across as goals that are too huge and complicated, but they begin with small steps in our daily lives, such as reducing the use of plastic bags. To quote the president, "If a small inconvenience on my part could amount to a whole lot of convenience on our part, I believe it's worth the while." World Environment Day was designated by the UN in 1972 to raise awareness about protecting the environment. A special event was held in Seoul involving ordinary citizens to celebrate this day. Our Ko Ryun-hee was there to check it out.
Almost 1,000 people gathered at a park in Seoul on Tuesday to celebrate World Environment Day. The celebration centered on the main theme of this year's World Environment Day, plastic pollution. It kicked off with a speech by Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun.
If a product can't be recycled, manufacturers should be careful about producing it in the first place. Every producer should think about how their behavior can affect the environment.
The Prime Minister also commended certain companies, civic groups, and educational institutions for their outstanding efforts in the area. A representative of a local environmental group said plastic pollution is a pressing matter for South Korea.
Per capita, South Korea uses the most plastic in the world. Each person goes through 130 kilograms of plastic a year. This huge amount of plastic has nowhere to go now.
In 2016, the country as a whole threw out 2.65 million tons of plastic waste, a 46% increase compared to 2011. Only 30 to 40% of plastic waste in 2016 was recycled. Participants said Tuesday's event caused them to reflect on their own behavior.
I like plants, so I use plastic cups as flower pots. Today, I learned that I should replace the cups with real flower pots and try not to use plastic.
The ministry ensured the refreshments were in keeping with the spirit of the day. Moving away from plastic, visitors can get free coffee if they bring their own multi-use cup or tumbler. The ministry prepared hands-on interactive experience booths, where they learned about things like upcycling, which is the process of transforming waste into new products of better quality or that have better environmental value.
I made this pencil cap. My kids buy ones made of plastic. However, I think this recycled one looks and feels better.
The ministry says it plans to communicate more with the public, like this, when coming up with concrete plans to reduce plastic waste. 고르니, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, what's the weather going to be like on Memorial Day tomorrow?
Daniel, the central region was hot today and tomorrow won't be much different. But in the southern regions, especially Gwangju and Daegu, a baking sun will make it 4 to 6 degrees hotter. Now, the sunlight will be intense tomorrow nationwide, especially between 2 and 5 p.m. So try to avoid being outside at these times since we are going to have very high UV levels. Tomorrow, Seoul will begin the morning at 19 degrees Celsius, while the rain has cooled down Daegu and Gyeongju to 17 and 16 degrees respectively. During the day under the sun, Seoul will reach up to 29 degrees, Gwangju will hit up to 30, and Busan to 24 degrees. Through Friday, it'll mostly stay clear and hot, but over on Sunday, there will be sporadic showers across the country, so it'll be somewhat cooler. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you in tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for watching.